It was a quiet evening in the small suburban town of Ridgewood. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. 16-year-old Maya Thompson was driving home after finishing her shift at the local cafe, where she worked part-time. She loved her job. It gave her a sense of independence, and the tips helped her save up for college. But tonight, something felt different. As she turned onto Maple Street, she noticed flashing red and blue lights. Behind her, Maya's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been speeding, she was sure of it. Still, she pulled over to the side of the road as calmly as she could, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Two police officers stepped out of their patrol car. One walked toward her window while the other lingered near the front of her vehicle, arms crossed. Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This was just a routine traffic stop, right? Nothing to worry about. The officer who approached her leaned down, his face partially hidden by the brim of his hat. His tone was sharp, almost impatient. "License and registration," he said, his voice cutting through the stillness of the night. Maya nodded quickly, forcing a polite smile as she reached for her documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed them over. As the officer flipped through her papers, his demeanor shifted. His eyes narrowed and his jaw tightened. He glanced at her again, this time more critically, as if studying every detail about her appearance. Maya couldn't help but feel uneasy. She'd lived in Ridgewood her whole life, but lately, things had felt tense. There were whispers around town about certain officers targeting people based on their skin color. Maya always tried to brush those thoughts aside, telling herself that Ridgewood wasn't like other places she'd heard about on the news. But now, sitting here under the harsh glare of the patrol car's headlights, doubt crept into her mind. The second officer, who had been standing nearby, muttered something under his breath. Maya couldn't make out the exact words, but his tone was dismissive, almost mocking. It made her stomach churn. She kept her gaze fixed on the dashboard, afraid to say or do anything that might escalate the situation. "Why were you driving so fast?" the first officer asked suddenly, snapping her attention back to him. Maya blinked in confusion. "Fast? I wasn't speeding," she replied softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. The officer didn't seem to hear her, or maybe he chose not. "Tourists don't lie to me," he snapped, his patience wearing thin. "We clocked you going way over the limit." Maya shook her head, her voice firmer this time. "I promise I wasn't. I always drive carefully." Her calm response only seemed to irritate the officer further. He exchanged a look with his partner, who smirked and shrugged. Then, without warning, the first officer began peppering her with questions that had nothing to do with her supposed speeding violation. "Where are you coming from?" "What were you doing there?" "Do your parents know you're out this late?" Each question came faster than the last, leaving Maya struggling to keep up. She answered honestly, explaining that she'd been working her shift at the cafe and was heading home. But the officers didn't seem satisfied. They interrupted her mid-sentence, accusing her of being disrespectful and uncooperative. Maya's chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell them they were wrong, but fear held her back. Instead, she sat silently, clutching the edge of her seat, hoping this nightmare would end soon. Then came the accusation that sent a chill down her spine. "There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest," the officer declared, his tone smug. Maya's eyes widened in disbelief. A warrant? That couldn't be true. She'd never been in trouble with the law before, not even a parking ticket. "I think there's been a mistake," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But the officer ignored her protests. He signaled to his partner, and together, they instructed Maya to step out of the car. Her legs felt like jelly as she obeyed, her mind racing with panic. Before she knew it, cold metal cuffs clicked around her wrists. Tears welled up in her eyes as they guided her toward the back seat of the patrol car. Sitting there, alone and frightened, Maya replayed the events in her head. How had this happened? Why were they treating her like a criminal when she hadn't done anything wrong? The weight of the moment pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. Yet amidst the chaos, one thought kept surfacing. Someone would figure this out. Someone would realize the truth and put an end to this madness. Until then, all she could do was wait and pray. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Maya, witnesses had gathered along the roadside, watching the scene unfold. Some recorded videos on their phones capturing snippets of the heated exchange between Maya and the officers. Within minutes, those clips would go viral, sparking outrage across Ridgewood and beyond. But for now, Maya remained oblivious, trapped in the suffocating confines of the patrol car, wondering how her ordinary evening had turned into such a nightmare. As the patrol car sped away with Maya in the back seat, her mind raced faster than the vehicle itself. She replayed every moment of the encounter, trying to pinpoint what had gone so horribly wrong. Had she made a mistake? Was there something she could have done differently to avoid this situation? But no matter how hard she thought, she couldn't come up with an answer. Everything about the interaction felt off, unnecessary, unfair, and deeply unsettling. The two officers in the front seats barely spoke to each other, their silence heavy and oppressive. Occasionally, one of them would glance at Maya through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. The tension in the car was suffocating. Maya tried to focus on her breathing, reminding herself that panic wouldn't help her now. She needed to stay calm, to think clearly, even though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. When they finally arrived at the police station, Maya was ushered inside quickly, almost as if the officers wanted to keep her out of sight. The building smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning supplies, a strange contrast to the chaos swirling inside her head. She was led to a small, drab room with gray walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor. A flickering fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the space. It felt more like a scene from a movie than real life. One of the officers instructed her to sit down, his tone clipped and unkind. "Stay here," he said, slamming the door shut behind him. Maya flinched at the sound, her hands trembling as she clasped them together on the table. For a while she sat alone, staring at the blank wall in front of her. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second dragging by like hours. Her thoughts bounced between fear, anger, and confusion. What were they planning to do with her? Would anyone believe her side of the story? Eventually, the door creaked open again and both officers entered the room. Their demeanor hadn't softened. If anything, they looked even more agitated than before. One of them slid a piece of paper across the table toward her. "Sign this," he demanded, pointing to a line near the bottom. Maya hesitated, leaning forward to read the document. It was filled with legal jargon that made her head spin. All she could make out was that it mentioned some kind of violation and required her acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "I don't understand," she said cautiously, looking up at them. "What am I signing?" "You're admitting to breaking the law," the officer replied sharply, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Just sign it and we can move on." "But I didn't break any laws," Maya protested, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay composed. "You pulled me over for no reason." The second officer scoffed, shaking his head as if amused by her defiance. "Listen, kid. You're not helping yourself by arguing. Just do what we say, and maybe things will go easier for you." "Easier?" The word echoed in Maya's mind. How could anything be easier when she was being forced to admit to something she hadn't done? She shook her head firmly. "I'm not signing anything until someone explains what's going on." Her refusal only seemed to infuriate them further. The first officer slammed his hand on the table, making Maya jump. "You really don't get it, do you?" he growled, leaning closer to her. "We're the ones in charge here. You play by our rules or suffer the consequences." For a brief moment, Maya considered giving in. Maybe if she signed the paper, they'd let her go home. Maybe all of this would blow over, and she could pretend it never happened. But deep down, she knew that wasn't the right choice. Signing the document would mean letting them win, letting them twist the truth to suit their narrative. And Maya refused to let that happen, not without a fight. The standoff continued for several minutes, neither side willing to back down. Finally, the officers exchanged frustrated glances and left the room, muttering under their breaths. Maya exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and dread. At least they hadn't forced her to sign anything, for now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Outside the police station, the situation was escalating rapidly. Witnesses who had recorded parts of the traffic stop began posting their videos online, sparking immediate outrage. Social media platforms lit up with comments and shares, the hashtag #JusticeForMaya trending within hours. People expressed disbelief and anger over the treatment Maya had endured, calling for accountability and reform. In Ridgewood, residents gathered outside the station, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some carried candles, creating a somber yet powerful vigil. Others held megaphones demanding answers from the police department. Among the crowd was Angela Thompson, Maya's mother. A well-respected attorney known for her advocacy work, Angela had received frantic calls from friends and neighbors alerting her to her daughter's arrest. When Angela arrived at the station, her usual calm demeanor was replaced by raw fury. She marched straight to the front desk, demanding to see her daughter. The officers on duty tried to stall her, citing protocol and paperwork, but Angela wasn't having it. "My daughter is 16 years old," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "She hasn't been charged with anything serious and I want to see her immediately." Reluctantly, the officers allowed Angela into the interrogation room where Maya sat waiting. Seeing her mother walk through the door brought tears to Maya's eyes. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Angela hugged her tightly, whispering words of reassurance. "It's going to be okay," she promised. "We'll figure this out together." But as Angela studied her daughter's tear-streaked face, she realized this wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or a simple misunderstanding. Something about the entire situation felt calculated, almost deliberate, and then it hit her, a chilling realization that sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just about Maya. It was about who Maya was, a black teenager in a world still riddled with prejudice and bias. Determined to uncover the truth, Angela launched into action. She called colleagues, friends, and local leaders, rallying support for her daughter's cause. Within hours, news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the growing public outcry. Protesters grew in number, spilling onto nearby streets and blocking traffic. Chants of Black Lives Matter echoed through the night, a reminder of the larger systemic issues at play. Back inside the station, the officers involved in Maya's arrest grew increasingly uneasy. They huddled in a corner office, reviewing her file for the 100th time. That's when one of them noticed something that stopped him cold. Listed prominently in her personal information was her full name, Maya Elizabeth Thompson. The name triggered a memory, a vague but unmistakable connection. Senator James Thompson, a prominent political figure known for championing civil rights and criminal justice reform, was her father. Suddenly everything clicked into place. Arresting a senator's daughter wasn't just bad press, it was a career-ending disaster. Panic rippled through the group. How had they missed this crucial detail earlier? Why hadn't anyone flagged it during the initial background check? Questions flew back and forth, but none of the answers mattered anymore. What mattered was damage control, and fast. Captain Harris, the precinct's commanding officer, was summoned urgently. When he walked into the room, his face was grim. He listened silently as the officers recounted the events leading up to Maya's arrest, interrupting only to ask pointed questions. By the end of the briefing, sweat dotted his brow. "This is a mess," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "A complete mess." He ordered Maya's immediate release, instructing the team to handle the situation delicately. But damage control was easier said than done. Reporters camped outside the station, microphones in hand, hungry for details. Protesters chanted louder, their voices carrying through the walls. Everyone wanted answers and justice. Inside the interrogation room, Maya and Angela prepared to leave. As they stood up, a senior officer knocked gently on the door and stepped inside. His tone was apologetic, almost sheepish. "Mrs. Thompson, we'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding," he began, avoiding eye contact. "Your daughter is free to go." Angela raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. Misunderstanding? She repeated, her voice laced with sarcasm. Is that what you're calling this? The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the gravity of the situation. We're conducting an internal investigation, he added hastily. Rest assured, appropriate measures will be taken. Angela didn't respond. Instead, she placed a protective arm around Maya and guided her out of the room. Outside, cameras flashed, capturing the emotional reunion between mother and daughter. Cheers erupted from the crowd as they made their way to Angela's car. For Maya, the relief was overwhelming but fleeting. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars of this experience would linger, serving as a painful reminder of the injustices faced by countless others like her. Yet amidst the pain there was also determination. Determination to speak out, to fight back, and to ensure that no one else had to endure what she had tonight. And so, as the car pulled away from the station, Maya stared out the window, watching the protesters fade into the distance. In that moment, she vowed to turn her nightmare into a catalyst for change, a spark that would ignite a movement far greater than herself. The hours following Maya's release from the police station were a whirlwind of emotions, activity, and growing tension. As word of her arrest spread like wildfire, Ridgewood transformed overnight into a battleground of opinions, protests, and demands for justice. The small suburban town, once known for its quiet streets and uneventful days, now found itself at the center of a national conversation about race, policing, and accountability. Angela Thompson wasted no time in taking action. After ensuring Maya was safe at home, she called an emergency meeting with close friends, colleagues, and community leaders. Her living room became a makeshift war room, filled with laptops, legal documents, and steaming cups of coffee. Angela spoke passionately, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "This isn't just about my daughter," she said firmly. "It's about every person who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. We can't let this go unanswered." Her words resonated deeply with those gathered. Everyone agreed that this incident needed to be addressed not only locally, but on a much larger scale. Plans were made to organize formal protests, draft petitions, and reach out to media outlets to amplify Maya's story. By morning, flyers had been printed and distributed throughout Ridgewood, calling on residents to join a peaceful demonstration outside the police station later that day. Meanwhile, social media continued to play a pivotal role in shaping public perception. Videos recorded by witnesses during the traffic stop gained millions of views, sparking outrage across platforms. Hashtags like Justice for Maya, End Racial Profiling, and Black Lives Matter trended nationwide. People shared personal stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, creating a chorus of voices demanding change. Celebrities, activists, and even politicians weighed in, amplifying the call for accountability. By noon, hundreds of people had gathered outside the police station holding signs that read, "Stop police brutality," and "Fair treatment for all." The atmosphere was charged with emotion, anger, frustration, but also hope. Speakers took turns addressing the crowd, sharing heartfelt messages of solidarity and resilience. One woman, a longtime resident of Ridgewood, stood on a makeshift platform and declared, "We've ignored these issues for too long. It's time to face them head-on." Maya watched the scene unfold from her bedroom window, her heart swelling with gratitude and determination. She hadn't expected such an outpouring of support, especially in a town where discussions about race often felt taboo. Yet here they were, people of all ages, races, and backgrounds coming together to demand better. For the first time since her arrest, Maya allowed herself to feel a glimmer of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of this nightmare. But not everyone in Ridgewood supported the movement. Some residents pushed back against the protests, arguing that the officers involved were simply doing their jobs. Letters to the editor appeared in the local newspaper, defending the police department, while others accused Maya and her family of exaggerating the situation for attention. These opposing viewpoints fueled heated debates online and offline, dividing the community further. Captain Harris, the precinct's commanding officer, found himself caught in the middle of the storm. He held a press conference in an attempt to quell the rising tensions, standing stiffly behind a podium as reporters fired questions at him. His apology sounded rehearsed and insincere, focusing more on damage control than genuine remorse. "We are conducting a thorough internal investigation," he assured the crowd, avoiding eye contact. "Any misconduct will be dealt with appropriately." His words did little to satisfy the protesters or the media. Many pointed out that similar promises had been made in the past, yet nothing substantial ever changed. Trust in the police department was eroding rapidly, and Captain Harris knew it. Behind closed doors, he convened an emergency meeting with his team, urging them to cooperate fully with investigators. "Our reputation is on the line," he warned. "If we don't handle this carefully, we'll lose the community's trust forever." Back at the Thompson household, Senator James Thompson returned home earlier than planned after hearing about his daughter's arrest. A towering figure with a commanding presence, he immediately embraced Maya, holding her tightly as if afraid to let go. When he finally pulled away, his eyes glistened with tears. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he said softly. "No child should have to endure what you did." Senator Thompson wasted no time in using his influence to push for change. He issued a powerful statement condemning the officer's actions and calling for an independent investigation led by state officials rather than the local police department. "What happened to my daughter is unacceptable," he wrote. "It highlights the systemic racism that continues to plague our society. We must address these issues openly and honestly, without fear of backlash or denial." His statement garnered widespread attention, with news outlets across the country picking up the story. Journalists flocked to Ridgewood, eager to capture interviews and footage of the unfolding events. Reporters knocked on doors, asking residents for their thoughts on the controversy. Some welcomed the opportunity to speak out, while others declined, citing discomfort with the sudden spotlight. As the days passed, the pressure mounted on both sides. Protesters grew in number, spilling onto neighboring streets and disrupting daily life in Ridgewood. Local businesses displayed signs of support, with some offering discounts to customers wearing Black Lives Matter apparel. Schools hosted assemblies to discuss racial inequality, encouraging students to express their feelings creatively through art, poetry, and essays. Conversations that had long been avoided were now front and center, forcing the community to confront uncomfortable truths. Amidst the chaos, Maya struggled to process everything happening around her. While she appreciated the support, she also felt overwhelmed by the constant attention. Reporters camped outside her house hoping to catch a glimpse of her or snag an exclusive interview. Strangers approached her in public, praising her bravery and offering hugs. Though well-intentioned, the flood of interactions left her drained and longing for normalcy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya sat on the porch with her mother. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the whirlwind of events. "Do you think anything will really change?" Maya asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Angela sighed, placing a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Change takes time," she admitted. "But your courage has already inspired so many people. That's a start." Maya nodded slowly, absorbing her mother's words. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also understood the importance of staying strong. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about sending a message to the world that injustice couldn't be ignored. And as she looked out, at the sea of candles flickering in the distance carried by protesters still marching for justice, Maya realized she wasn't alone. There was power in numbers, strength in unity, and hope in the collective fight for a better future. Inside the precinct, panic was brewing. The officers involved in Maya's arrest huddled together in a dimly lit office, their faces pale and drawn. Captain Harris had left them to figure things out, but none of them knew where to start. The weight of what they'd done, or rather what they might have unknowingly unleashed, was sinking in. They had been so focused on asserting control during the traffic stop that they hadn't stopped to consider who Maya really was. Now, it was too late. One of the officers, Officer Grayson, sat slumped at his desk scrolling through Maya's file again. He stared blankly at her full name, Maya Elizabeth Thompson. It wasn't just any name, it was a name tied to someone important, someone powerful. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he searched for confirmation, though deep down he already knew. Senator James Thompson, one of the most prominent politicians in the state, was her father. Not only that, but he chaired a committee dedicated to reforming law enforcement practices, an irony that hit Grayson like a punch to the gut. Grayson turned to his partner, Officer Miller, who was pacing nervously near the window. "Miller," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you realize whose kid we arrested?" Miller stopped mid-step, his face contorted in confusion. "What are you talking about?" "It's Senator Thompson's daughter, Grayson," replied, pointing at the screen. "The guy pushing for all those reforms, the guy who's been calling us out for years?" For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Then, slowly, realization dawned on Miller's face. His shoulders sagged as if the gravity of the situation had physically crushed him. "Oh no," he muttered, under his breath. "This is bad, this is really, really bad." The two men exchanged panicked glances. Arresting anyone always carried risks, but arresting the child of a high-profile politician, that was a disaster waiting to happen. Especially when that politician happened to be a vocal advocate for racial justice and police accountability. If word got out, and judging by the protests outside it already had, they could kiss their careers goodbye. "What do we do?" Miller asked, running a hand through his hair. "We can't just sit here and wait for this to blow up in our faces." "We need to cover our tracks," Grayson suggested, though even as he said it, he knew it sounded desperate. "If we can prove we acted based on probable cause, maybe we can salvage something." "But there was no probable cause," Miller snapped, throwing his hands up in frustration. "She wasn't speeding, she didn't resist, and there was no warrant. We made it all up because—" His voice trailed off, unwilling to finish the sentence. "Because we thought we could get away with it," Grayson finished for him, his tone bitter. "And now look where it's gotten us." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Captain Harris appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Without saying a word, he closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms crossed. "I just got off the phone with City Hall," he announced. "They're breathing down my neck about this mess. Everyone's watching us, reporters, protesters, even the governor. So tell me, gentlemen, how exactly did we end up arresting the daughter of one of the most influential people in the state?" Grayson swallowed hard, avoiding eye contact. "Sir, I don't know what happened. We followed protocol, but—" "Protocol?" Harris cut him off sharply. "You pulled over a teenager for no reason, accused her of crimes she didn't commit, and then threw her in cuffs without evidence. That's not protocol, that's reckless stupidity." Miller shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Captain, we didn't know who she was at the time. If you'd known, you wouldn't have acted like bullies." Harris shot back, slamming his fist onto the desk. Papers scattered across the surface as he leaned forward, his face inches from theirs. "Do you understand the magnitude of this? You've handed Senator Thompson a golden opportunity to dismantle this department piece by piece, and trust me, he'll take it." The room fell silent again, the weight of Harris's words hanging heavily in the air. For the first time, Grayson and Miller truly understood the scope of their mistake. This wasn't just about losing their jobs or facing disciplinary action. This was about becoming symbols of everything wrong with law enforcement. A cautionary tale splashed across headlines nationwide. Harris straightened up, pinching the bridge of his nose as he tried to compose himself. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice colder now. "We're releasing Maya immediately, and I mean immediately. No excuses, no delays. We'll issue a public apology and claim it was all a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, you two," he pointed at Grayson and Miller, "are going to keep your mouths shut. Don't talk to reporters, don't post anything online, and for heaven's sake, don't try to justify yourselves. Got it?" Both officers nodded reluctantly, though neither looked particularly reassured. Harris sighed, shaking his head as he turned to leave. Before stepping out, he paused and glanced back at them. "This isn't just your careers on the line anymore," he added quietly. "It's the entire department. Try not to make things worse." Outside, the crowd continued to grow. By now, thousands of people had gathered, spilling onto sidewalks and blocking traffic. Signs waved in the air, chanting echoed through the streets, and cameras flashed nonstop as news crews documented the historic moment. Among the sea of protesters stood Angela Thompson, flanked by friends and supporters. She held a megaphone, addressing the crowd with fiery determination. "This is not just about my daughter," she declared, her voice ringing out loud and clear. "This is about every black child, every black person who has ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. What happened to Maya is unacceptable, and we will not rest until real change happens." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy palpable. Standing nearby, Maya watched her mother with a mix of pride and awe. She had always admired Angela's strength and resilience, but seeing her lead such a massive movement was inspiring. Still, Maya couldn't shake the lingering fear gnawing at the edges of her mind. Would an apology and a few changes within the department be enough? Or would this all fade away once the cameras stopped rolling? As night fell, the protests showed no signs of slowing down. Candles flickered in the darkness, casting a warm glow over the determined faces of demonstrators. Maya joined her mother, on stage, holding her hand tightly as they addressed the crowd together. "Thank you for standing with us," Maya said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Your support means everything. But remember, this fight doesn't end here. We have to keep pushing for justice. Not just for me, but for everyone." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning thunderous applause. In that moment, Maya realized she wasn't just a victim of injustice. She was also a symbol of hope. Her story had ignited a movement, bringing people together in ways she never imagined possible. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: change was coming, and Maya intended to be part of it. Back inside the precinct, Grayson and Miller sat silently, staring at the chaos unfolding on the news. Their actions had set off a chain reaction they couldn't undo. All they could do now was brace themselves for the consequences and pray they wouldn't lose everything in the process. The days following Maya's arrest were a blur of activity for everyone involved. Inside the police precinct, Captain Harris scrambled to contain the fallout, issuing statements and holding press conferences in an attempt to control the narrative. Meanwhile, Grayson and Miller, the two officers at the center of the controversy, found themselves ostracized by their colleagues and haunted by the weight of their actions. Outside, the protest continued to grow, drawing national attention and turning Ridgewood into a symbol of both systemic injustice and collective resistance. Captain Harris knew that damage control was critical if he wanted to save his department and, possibly his own career, from ruin. He called another emergency meeting with Grayson and Miller, this time behind closed doors. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension, as the three men sat around a small table littered with coffee, cups and crumpled papers. Harris leaned forward, his elbows resting heavily on the surface. "Listen carefully," he began, his voice low but firm. "This isn't just about you two anymore. It's about the entire department. If we don't handle this right, we're finished. Do you understand?" Grayson nodded slowly, his face pale and drawn. "Yes, sir." Harris turned his attention to Miller, who avoided eye contact altogether. "Good. Now here's what we're going to do. First, we release a public apology, not just from me, but from all of us. Second, we cooperate fully with any investigations. Third, and most importantly, you two stay out of sight. No interviews, no comments, nothing. Let me handle the media." Miller finally looked up, his expression uneasy. "But what happens when they dig deeper? What about the traffic stop itself? There's no way to spin it. We didn't have probable cause." Harris sighed, rubbing his temples. "We'll deal with that later. For now, we stick to the script. It was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication. People make mistakes, it's human nature. We apologize, promise reforms, and move forward. Grayson frowned, clearly unconvinced. You think that's going to work? Senator Thompson isn't going to let this slide. He's not some random politician looking for headlines. This is personal for him. I know, Harris admitted grimly. Which is why we need to act fast. I've already reached out to City Hall and the governor's office. They're sending representatives to oversee the investigation. In the meantime, we focus on transparency, or at least the appearance of it. As Harris laid out his plan, Grayson and Miller exchanged uneasy glances. Both knew the truth. There was no spinning this. Their actions during the traffic stop had been reckless and discriminatory, driven by biases they hadn't even realized they harbored until now. And while Harris talked about apologies and cooperation, neither officer believed it would be enough to undo the harm they'd caused. Outside the precinct, the protests showed no signs of slowing down. Each day brought more people, students, families, activists, all united under the banner of justice. Angela Thompson worked tirelessly alongside community leaders to keep the momentum going, organizing rallies, drafting petitions, and reaching out to journalists. Her efforts paid off as national media outlets descended upon Ridgewood, eager to cover the story. Senator James Thompson also played a pivotal role, using his platform to amplify the movement. He gave impassioned speeches on television, calling for sweeping reforms within law enforcement agencies across the country. What happened to my daughter is not an isolated incident, he declared during one interview. It's a symptom of a much larger problem, a system that disproportionately targets Black individuals and communities. We cannot continue to ignore this issue. Real change starts now. His words resonated deeply with viewers, sparking conversations in living rooms, classrooms, and workplaces nationwide. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Justice for Maya and Police Reform Now, amplifying the call for accountability. Celebrities, athletes, and influencers joined the chorus, sharing stories of their own experiences with racial profiling and demanding action. Despite the growing support, Maya struggled to adjust to her newfound visibility. Reporters camped outside her house hoping for exclusive interviews or glimpses of her daily life. Strangers approached her in public, offering hugs, condolences, and words of encouragement. While she appreciated the kindness, the constant attention left her feeling overwhelmed and exposed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maya sat on the porch with her mother. The cool breeze carried the faint sound of chanting from the ongoing protest nearby. Angela placed a comforting hand on her daughter's shoulder. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. Maya shrugged, staring at the ground. "I don't know. Sometimes it feels like everyone's watching me, waiting for me to say or do something, but other times, I feel like maybe this can actually make a difference." "It will," Angela assured her, her voice steady. "Your courage has inspired so many people. You've given them a reason to speak out, to demand better. That's powerful." Maya nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother's words, but part of her worried that once the initial shock wore off, people would forget. Would the protests fade away? Would the promises of reform go unfulfilled? These questions swirled in her mind, keeping her awake at night. Back inside the precinct, Grayson and Miller tried to piece together their next steps. Both men were aware that their careers, and perhaps their freedom, were hanging by a thread. They spent hours rehearsing potential explanations, practicing how to frame their actions as honest mistakes rather than acts of discrimination. Yet, no matter how many times they ran through the scenarios, the truth remained glaringly obvious. They had overstepped, and there was no justification for it. Their attempts at damage control took a darker turn when rumors began circulating about internal discussions regarding scapegoats. Some senior officers suggested pinning the blame solely on Grayson and Miller, portraying them as rogue individuals acting against department policies. The idea infuriated both men, who argued that such tactics only perpetuated the cycle of injustice they were accused of perpetrating. "We followed orders," Miller snapped during one heated exchange with a superior. "You're throwing us under the bus because it's easier than admitting the whole system is broken." You made your bed, the superior shot back coldly. Now lie in it. The confrontation left Grayson and Miller feeling betrayed and abandoned. They realized that despite their years of service, loyalty meant little when reputations and jobs were on the line. As they walked away from the meeting, shoulders slumped in defeat, they couldn't help but wonder if redemption was even possible. Meanwhile, Captain Harris faced mounting pressure from city officials and the public alike. Protesters gathered outside his home, holding signs and chanting slogans demanding his resignation. Calls flooded his phone, ranging from angry threats to desperate pleas for leniency. Exhausted and increasingly paranoid, Harris began second-guessing every decision he made. He knew that regardless of the outcome, his reputation, and likely his career, was irreparably damaged. In a last-ditch effort to regain control, Harris announced the implementation of sweeping reforms within the department. Body cameras would become mandatory for all officers. Bias training programs would be expanded, and independent oversight committees would be established to monitor misconduct. While some praised these measures as necessary steps toward progress, others dismissed them as superficial band-aids designed to placate critics without addressing deeper issues. As the weeks passed, it became clear that there was no easy solution. The protests refused to die down, fueled by a growing sense of urgency and determination. Community members demanded more than apologies. They wanted tangible change. And while the road ahead promised to be long and arduous, one thing was certain. Maya's story had ignited a movement that could no longer be ignored. For Maya herself, the experience was transformative. Though scarred by the trauma of her arrest, she emerged stronger and more resolute than ever. She vowed to use her platform to advocate for justice, knowing that her voice had the power to inspire others. And as she stood among the protesters, holding a sign that read "Black Lives Matter," she felt a surge of hope, a belief that together they could build a better future.